Alright, possible musical accompaniment depending on what my dad does with the stereo. Here to do my UFC on Fox, Velasquez versus Dos Santos picks. Starting with the undercard, because the undercard for this event is interesting, exciting, and just one of the better undercards they've come up with in a while. Aaron Rosa versus Matt Lucas. We've seen Aaron Rosa as a heavyweight in the UFC. Um, he lost to Joey Beltran. Notable wins over the likes of A. Wagner, Devin Cole. Lost to Fei Zhao. Lost to Jared Hammond. A couple other, he's been around the block a couple times. A good wrestler, a good, well-rounded fighter. When he cuts down to 205, he doesn't look like quite the same level of fat piece of crap that he did against Beltran. His home is definitely the 205 division. He's not big enough to be a heavyweight. He's facing a newcomer to the UFC, Matt Lucas, a guy who I've had an eye on for a while. He's not one of those can't miss prospects, but he's definitely a guy who very athletic, good wrestling, pretty well rounded all around. Just a very good fighter. Rosa, however, I think has the veteran ability here. Additionally, I'm always hesitant to pick a UFC debuting guy who's never fought on a stage anywhere near this big, and that's why I'm taking Aaron Rosa by a unanimous decision. I also think Rosa is probably a slightly better wrestler, slightly bigger as well. Mike Pierce versus Paul Bradley. Mike Pierce is heading up to middleweight. Not sure what to make of that because, Mike Pierce at 5'8" is just too short to be a middleweight. He's big enough, he's thick enough, he's strong enough to be a middleweight, but he's very short. He had problems with Johnny Hendricks in their fight with speed, basically, but he has in the past beaten Paul Bradley. I believe their previous fight was at welterweight. I don't see this being all that different. Paul Bradley was very underwhelming in his UFC debut against Rafael Natal. So I'm going to have to take Mike Pierce by unanimous decision. Then we have Alex Caceres versus Cole Escobedo. Alex Caceres, of course, of tough fame. Bruce Leroy, considered to be a very good, very solid fighter. Has pretty good stand-up. It's creative. It's, pretty decent. His wrestling's not bad, but he has a tendency to be somewhat easy tappings. Not that he gets stuck in submissions easily, but he's been tapped by Jimmy Hedis, he's been tapped by Mackin Semzer, Matt McCook, Farkad Sharpov, that's a guy to actually kind of look out for in the future. But Cole Escobedo, he's a good submission guy. He's got good stand-up in his own right. He's an okay wrestler. I see the first round being somewhat Caceres because he comes out pretty strong. Escobedo isn't the quickest starter in the world, also isn't the greatest wrestler, so I see Caceres being able to keep the standing for the first round, and then getting taken down in the second round, probably getting caught with a rear naked choke or something of that nature. So second round submission for Cole Escobedo. Robert Peralta versus Mackins Semzer, which, just talking about Mackins just a little bit ago. In this fight, you're looking at two guys who have a lot to prove. Mackins is a very athletic fighter. He's an exciting fighter. He is coming off the win over Alex Caceres after 3 straight losses to Tarso Vasquez and Cub Swanson. All 3 of those are pretty good fighters. But I don't really think he has the ability to hang around in the UFC long term. And Robert Peralta might. I'm not very high on Robert Peralta, but a lot of people are talking him up. A lot of people are making a big deal about, this is a guy who, he's got good boxing, he's got good wrestling, so on. He beat Iruyuki Takaya. But his next biggest win is Mike Lolo, who's a guy who I really don't think fit in the UFC. And, of course, was embarrassed by Edson Barbosa. That being said, based on, the fact that I don't know about Peralta, and I do not really think Semzer is a UFC level fighter, I'm taking Robert Peralta. That being said, if Semzer beats Peralta, I think Peralta needs to be shown the door. But they do, he's their new Roger Huerta, their new tool for bringing in Mexican fans. So he'll probably stick around. I'm going to go with a split D, possibly unanimous decision for Peralta. Darren Uemyomo versus Kid Yamamoto. Problem with this fight for Uemyomo, who's an exciting prospect, guy who's come in. He doesn't do very well when he's out wrestled, and Kid Yamamoto should be able to do that. Kid Yamamoto is certainly not the Kid Yamamoto of the past. He's a little slower. He's not looking as good as he ages, but I think he's bigger. I'm not sure until seeing them side by side. I'm not really sure who's bigger, but I think he's bigger because Yumio also fought at 145 at one point. And I think he's a better wrestler. And I think this should equate to a probably decision victory. I'm a little uncomfortable picking so many decisions, but I don't think Yumanyoma's ever been finished. Oh, no, yes, he has. He was submitted by the guillotine last year in April. But he's never been knocked out or TKO'd. That tends to be more of Kid's idea than Sub's particularly. So Kid, unanimous decision. DeMarcus Johnson, Clay Harvinson. Clay Harvinson, of course, of tough fame. Defeated Justin Edwards coming off the Ultimate Fighter. I still don't think very highly of Harvinson. He to me just seems like a brawler who has some wrestling skills. And I'm going to see DeMarcus Johnson taking a late second or early third round submission here. I think DeMarcus Johnson is not a world-beating welterweight by any means, but he's got good stand-up. He's got good wrestling. He's got good submissions. Tends to be sometimes more prone to getting caught in submissions. And looked terrible against Mir Sadal, admittedly. But I see him being enough to take out Clay Harvinson here to take a submission victory at some point here. I just don't think Clay is of a UFC caliber fighter. Ricardo Lamas versus Cub Swanson. Generally speaking, I favor Ricardo Lamas. I've never been the biggest fan of Cub Swanson, admittedly. He's an exciting fighter, don't get me wrong. Very well-rounded and everything. Very good. But every time he steps up in like proper competition, he has a tendency to not perform at his peak. I mean, we saw that when he eked out the decision against Semenzer. He got, destroyed by, not destroyed because it was a decision, but Chad Mendes thoroughly beat him. Jose Aldo, I'm aware that these are, the champion and the next contender at the weight class, but it seems like outside of a fight with Hiroyuki Takaya, every time he takes that step up in competition, he somewhat falters. Lamas is a bit of a step up in competition. Is this Lamas' debut at featherweight or not? Lamas' second fight at featherweight. He defeated Matt Grice. Lamas, I think, is a better wrestler, and I don't see Swanson being able to sub him from bottom. As a result, I'm taking Ricardo Lamas probably by a unanimous decision. That being said, Ricardo Lamas himself has some problems, and that is when he is, for lack of a better term, I'm going to go with bullied. When he has that hard time taking you down, or when you can take him down, like the Danny Castillo fight and the Yuri Alcantara fight, for different reasons, he tends to shut down, and Cub Swanson is definitely able to do that. So Cub Swanson could finish him here, but I'm taking Lamas by unanimous decision. I think we'll know very early on, though. If in the first round Lamas comes out, gets stuffed a couple times, or gets taken down by Cub, he could falter mentally. Dustin Poirier versus Pablo Garza. Good fight in the sense that it could be exciting. That being said, Poirier is just on a different level. Dustin Poirier has done, outside of the Jason Young fight, which was, not a tremendously impressive feat. He's looked very good in the UFC. Of course, he beat Josh Grisby, beat Jason Young. Pablo Garza is, exciting because he pulls off random knockouts and random submissions because of his very long limbs. But I just don't see him being skilled enough in any particular area to do anything about Poirier. I think Poirier can outstrike him, and I think Poirier can out-wrestle him, and I think Poirier can out-grapple him. Poirier has not historically been a finisher in the UFC. He hasn't finished anyone in the UFC. And he hasn't finished anyone particularly good. But I'm going to gamble here and say that Poirier will submit Pablo Garza in the second round of their fight. Possibly by an armbar, because I look at Garza's arms and the way he holds them on the ground. I think that's just begging for an armbar. But that's just me. Chloe Guida versus Benson Henderson. Benson Henderson by unanimous decision. Guida is, the Energizer Bunny. There are a few guys with better cardio than Clay Guida. That being said, we've seen in the past that when Guida, is unable to take you down, he doesn't really have an answer. And the thing is, I think Benson Henderson is a better wrestler, and I think a better stand-up guy, and probably a little faster, and has the cardio to keep up with Clay Guida. Despite the fact that, Guida's had numerous great runs lately, and he's on a hot streak, very solidly since the loss to Kenny Florian. That being said, I think Benson Henderson does a lot of the same things Clay Guida does, and does them better. So I take Ben Henderson by unanimous decision. Then on to the main event. Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, the live on Fox Sports fight. And when breaking down this fight, there's a couple of factors. I mean, Cain, great wrestling, pretty good stand-up, always improving, but a lot of ring rust. Hasn't fought in some time. It's been a while since the Lesnar fight that he won his title, whereas JDS has been keeping, pretty fresh with wins over the likes of, Roy Nelson, Shane Carwin, Crow Cop, etc. Not necessarily during the layoff, but overall, he's been fighting very top competition. Dos Santos is definitely not a guy who, in no way has Dos Santos been protected during his UFC run, to be honest. Because, like I said, Carwin, Nelson, Gonzaga, Ivel, Crow Cops, Stephen Struve, Fabricio Verdum. That's a pretty impressive name toll for him. One thing I have noticed, and it looked a little better in the Carwin fight, but I don't know if it's overall really improved, is that, and it's going to sound weird, but I do believe that Junior Dos Santos is very hittable. Junior Dos Santos' boxing defense appears not to be the greatest on the planet. We saw it in the Crow Cop fight, we saw it in the Nelson fight, we saw it in a couple other fights that he does get hit with a reasonably high percentage of punches. Now, he does have a good chin, he does have good recovery, so it's not a huge problem, and it's looked better. That being said, I do wonder if Cain can clip him with a few things on the feet. That being said, and people are making a big deal about how hard he is to take down, but I think Cain is not necessarily on a technical level, but on a practical level with his explosiveness, his speed, how well he shoots for the double and the single leg, is on a different level as Carwin in wrestling. Offensive wrestling, anyways. Carwin's defensive wrestling is very good. But offensively, I think Cain's on a different level. If the ring rust doesn't play a huge role, I'm taking Cain via third round TKO. I think that he can get Dos Santos down. I think he can punish him. And we've seen in the past that Cain is a finisher, unlike, certain other highly decorated wrestlers that we've seen come up in the UFC. Not in the UFC necessarily, but in MMA in general. I'm thinking of guys like Cole Conrad and, well, Conrad's the one that really comes to mind. John Madsen's another one. But Cain's very much a finisher, and I see him being able to finish Junior Dos Santos. That being said, if he hasn't handled the time off very well, this is Junior's fight to win, because ring rust can be a huge, huge problem. And Cain's chin is not amazing. His recovery is very good, but his chin is not particularly amazing. We saw that in the Czech Congo fight. But, yeah. I think that he's taken that step. I think his stand-up defense is a lot better since that fight. And I think he'll win via TKO in the third round, as I said. That's my predictions for the card. It's a very good card. Not breaking a lot of finishes, but the decisions are exciting, interesting fights, which I think people sometimes very much overlook. But that's all. Have a good time.